The Apothecary Diaries was good almost immediately. Maomao is a great protagonist, the mysteries are fun to follow, and the palace has enough hierarchy and social friction that even a fairly small problem can become interesting once Maomao starts digging into it. And for a long stretch, that is mostly where the show is comfortable staying. Bad things happen, sometimes very bad things, but Maomao is usually looking at them after the fact, when the danger has already turned into something she can investigate. And then suddenly, in episode 19, that distance is gone. Maomao is sprinting through the palace, forcing her way past guards, getting hit hard enough to leave her face covered in blood, and still pushing forward because she has realized that whatever those strange incidents were pointing toward is happening right now. And when she finally makes it, for a few minutes, it feels like the show gets bigger all at once. And what caught me off guard is that episode 19 does not really pull that feeling out of nowhere. It mostly makes you care about things you had already moved on from. Last week, I ran a poll asking what episode took the Apothecary Diaries from good to great for you. And 77% of you picked episode 4. And I get it. Episode 4 is probably where Maomao became a great character for me too. We already knew she was smart. But episode 4 is where Maomao starts feeling much more specific as a character, because the second she realizes Lihua is still being poisoned by the face powder, that whole "this really isn't my problem" attitude disappears. And whatever patience she had for being polite goes with it almost immediately. Looking back though, I think Maomao got there before the show did. For quite a while after that, I was completely happy following her from one strange problem to the next. And I don't mean that as criticism. The episodic structure had found the rhythm that worked, and I wasn't sitting there waiting for some enormous plot to reveal itself. Episode 18 and 19 were where I realized I had been treating a lot of these stories as more self-contained than the show had. So what had it been doing in those 15 episodes that made the same show suddenly feel so much bigger? A big reason that early rhythm worked so well was Maomao herself. She can spend half an episode insisting none of this is really her problem, but all it takes is one detail she can't explain before her curiosity takes over, and before long, she's more invested than anyone who actually asked her to be there. Which is a deeply inconvenient personality trait for someone trying very hard to mind her own business. That rhythm also fits Maomao unusually well. She rarely seems to be thinking much further ahead than whatever problem is bothering her right now. And once she has an answer, she's usually pretty ready to move on. Honestly, so was I. A caseful end, I would think. That was clever, and then I was ready to see whatever nonsense Jinshi was going to drag her into next. But even when a mystery ended cleanly, it usually left something behind. You learned a little more about the palace, who gets listened to, who gets ignored, and how limited Maomao actually is, even when she's obviously the smartest person in the room. What I didn't realize, that I was moving on a little faster than the show was. Which is why I always found it a little strange when people complained that season 2 felt episodic. Because to me, the Apothecary Diaries had always been episodic. Like, no shit, that was kind of the show. The trick is that it was never only episodic. Older anime could live in this kind of rhythm for an absurd amount of time, and it is not hard to see why. It is incredibly easy to settle into. You can put on an episode of something like Detective Conan, get a new case, watch the clues slowly come together, and by the end you have gotten a complete little story, even if the larger plot has barely moved. After enough episodes, that rhythm starts teaching you how to watch it. You still care about whether the case is clever, but you also learn that most of what happens this week probably belongs to this week. And that is not automatically a problem. Mushishi is probably my favorite example of that. Because Ginko can wander into somebody's life, spend an episode dealing with whatever strange situation the Mushi have created there, and then leave, with a very good chance that we are never seeing those people again. But the episode does not feel disposable just because the plot moves on. It leaves behind a mood, or an idea, or some slightly different way of understanding the world. So when the Apothecary Diaries gives you the same self-contained satisfaction early on, I think it is very easy to watch it with that part of your brain. A mystery resolves, Maomao moves on, and there is no real reason to assume the weird thing she noticed 6 episodes ago is quietly waiting to become part of something larger. Except apparently, the Apothecary Diaries wasn't quite as done with these stories as I was. That rhythm gets a lot less comfortable once Lacan starts getting closer to Maomao. Because for once, the thing bothering her is something she very clearly does not want to understand. The weird thing about Lacan is that he should be exactly the kind of person Maomao cannot resist figuring out. His interest in her is strange. There is clearly some history we do not understand yet. And normally, that would be more than enough to have Maomao quietly obsessing over it until she found an answer. With Lacan, she mostly just wants him to go away. And for someone who can get visibly excited over a poison most people would rather stay 10 feet away from, that lack of curiosity is pretty revealing. Maomao is usually at her most comfortable around things everybody else wants nothing to do with. Poison, illness, some bizarre reaction she has never seen before. At least those give her something concrete to work with, and eventually, some kind of answer. In a weird way, Maomao becomes the mystery for a while, and I really like that. We have spent so much of the season watching her notice things other people would rather keep hidden, so there is something very fitting about learning more about Maomao through the one question she refuses to chase. And then episode 19 starts pulling old cases back into the story, which is where the show gets a little sneaky. Because these were not mysteries I was still waiting to have solved. There was a warehouse fire, and a handful of other incidents around the palace that had all worked perfectly well as their own little stories. Episode 19 is not asking me to go back and admit I misunderstood all of those mysteries the first time around. I understood what happened. What I did not understand was what some of those incidents might be connected to. And the episode lets that realization build instead of dropping the entire answer on Maomao at once. She starts going back over incidents that had seemed unrelated, and one connection makes the next one harder to ignore. The warehouse fire is a good example because when it originally happens, it is pretty easy to treat the fire itself as the story. Something went wrong, everyone reacts to it, Maomao notices that there is more going on than there first appeared to be, and eventually the episode moves on. But when she comes back to it here, the fire starts looking less important than the opportunity it created, while everybody was busy paying attention to the fire. From there, the possibility that everything else happened independently starts getting harder to believe. And this is where all the episodic structure starts paying off. Because that Detective Conan rhythm has already taught us that once a case is solved, most of its little details can be mentally retired. Episode 19 knows that, and this is probably the point where I stopped thinking of these as the little mysteries Maomao solves, and started looking at the season as one larger story. And I think recontextualization is a more useful word for what the show is doing here than just calling it foreshadowing. A piece of foreshadowing often feels like the story tapping you on the shoulder and saying, maybe remember this. Recontextualization is a little different because the first scene can already feel complete. You got an answer, the episode worked, nothing necessary felt missing. Then the story comes back later and gives the same information a larger meaning than you realized it had. Once Maomao realizes where all of this is leading, there is not much time for the usual satisfaction that comes with solving one of these things. If she is right, somebody at that ceremony may already be in danger, and knowing that gives her somewhere she needs to be immediately. The problem is that Maomao has spent most of the series being smart enough to notice things that people with far more authority completely miss. Usually she can pass what she knows to Jinshi or Gaoshun, or at least has enough time to get the information in front of somebody who can actually do something with it. That is a lot harder when she's trying to interrupt an important ceremony because she thinks somebody there may be about to die. And to be fair to the guard, this situation probably looks ridiculous from his side. Some servant he has never seen before has just appeared out of nowhere, acting like she has a perfectly normal reason to force her way into one of the most important ceremonies in the palace. He has none of the information she has spent the last few episodes piecing together, and Maomao does not exactly have time to catch him up on the last several months of the show. Here, a guard can simply tell her no. And as far as he's concerned, he has every reason to. Then he hits her hard enough that I think most people could have gone home afterward feeling like they had made a pretty respectable effort. Maomao, unsurprisingly, keeps going. By the time Maomao is pushing past that guard, I never really feel like the show has suddenly decided it needs an action climax either. This is still the same kind of problem she has been dealing with all season, except now there is no time left. She knows where she needs to go. The palace will not let her go there, and for once, being clever from a safe distance is not going to solve it. Then the ceremonial pillar comes down, and the person she ends up saving is Jinshi. Which is funny, because Jinshi is not actually the reason Maomao ran there. She knows somebody at the ceremony is in danger before she knows who that person is. So the mystery gets her through the door. Finding Jinshi underneath that pillar just makes the vaulting hit a little differently once she gets there. And by this point, Jinshi has been orbiting Maomao for most of the season. A lot of the time he's basically another complication attached to whatever problem she's already dealing with. A very pretty complication, but still a complication. He finds some reason to bother her. Maomao looks at him like he has personally ruined what was otherwise shaping up to be a perfectly decent day. And somewhere in the middle of all that irritation, the two of them keep getting a little closer, almost by accident. Jinshi is not exactly the difficult one to read. He is fascinated with Maomao pretty early on. Maomao is where it gets a lot harder, and I think the show is better for it. She's not going to stop in the middle of an episode and carefully explain what Jinshi means to her. And I would probably be a little disappointed if she did. Most of the time you get much more out of what she puts up with from him. The rare moments where he actually catches her off guard. And the fact that she keeps allowing him into parts of her life, despite acting like she would prefer the exact opposite. By now, their back and forth had honestly became one of the things I was looking forward to almost as much as the mysteries themselves. So when the larger plot finally catches both of them at once, the scene does not need a confession to make it matter. We already know this too. Then Jinshi carries Maomao away, and Lakan is there watching. A few minutes earlier, Maomao was the one forcing her way through the palace to stop something from happening at that ceremony. Now she's the one injured, being carried out of it. And I think that simple reversal gives the scene a lot of weight without making either of them more sentimental than they usually are. Lakan being there makes the image even stranger, because episode 18 has just made Maomao's history with him impossible to ignore. He has spent all this time hovering around her story from a distance, and now he's watching Jinshi carry her away. This person who started as another palace annoyance and has somehow become one of the most constant people in her life. And I think that is why that shot sticks with me. So much of what I had been treating as separate parts of the show is suddenly sitting in the same scene. And the funny part is that most of it had been there for ages. I was just treating a lot of it like stories that were already over. And for me, that was the difference. Maomao had already gotten there a long time ago. Episode 19 was where the showrunner finally went from good to great. And for more Apothecary Diaries, click here for my video on episode 4 and the point where Maomao went from a character I liked to one I loved. Thanks for watching, like, subscribe, goodbye.